on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Hollywood Already Did It, your movie podcast for sequels, requels, remakes, reboots, and examining why or why not they should be here and if they're doing anything different for their franchise. As always, I'm your host, and with me is Terrence Tatum.
Hello, everyone.
And on this lovely, lovely weekend, we are closing out with MaXXXine, the final in the Surprise X trilogy. I guess it's a surprise trilogy because they made X and then they were like, guess what? We also made Pearl, and guess what? A
It's
third
gonna be
one's coming.
right.
Um, so yeah, Ty West's full vision with A24 has been fulfilled. We are at the end of what is currently a trilogy, but as always, someone's like, what about more? And someone's like, I do like money.
Money is
Uh,
nice.
but we're here. Each of these movies has kind of been a different take on the horror genre, I feel like, and always sort of explored the themes of Hollywood and fame and violence and sex and gore. And so we are in it now as MaXXXine goes from porn star to horror star. Terrence, what did you think?
I must say that I joined the Pearl X train late. I did not see them at theaters, and I didn't see them until everybody was talking about how much they were. And so I watched them back to back on Halloween last year. And then I was like, wait, there's a third one coming? I can't wait. And so I went in there with a little bit high of an expectation. I do enjoy that these three films have all been stylistically and different, and I truly appreciate that. I enjoyed this film. I did not love it the way that I loved the first two. My biggest issue is probably because I got in front of it, and I don't think it's hard to not get in front of this film. I think it's pretty self, like, I'm telling you where we're going, and I don't know if they're intending to do that or if that was the choice, but I caught where this was heading and who was doing what, who was responsible for what early, like 5 minutes in. And so then I'm watching this movie from a standpoint of like, okay, uh, do I enjoy the ride that it's taking me on? And for the most part, I did. I loved all the Hollywood shenanigans because I'm in that life, and I dug all of that. When it starts getting into the kills, I dug it. But unfortunately, a couple of things with me being ahead of it, and when the police get involved, they are so inept that it messes up logical senses of this movie. I think what works with both Pearl and X is that they're a little bit more self-contained. And so when you get to a bigger world, when you start pulling at threads in like this film, it doesn't all hold up. And so when you start thinking about this movie, you're like, well, hold on. Guys, how is the police so far behind this?
Yeah.
In case in point, we'll talk about it. But like there's a tape that has evidence on it that is at a crime scene that they would collect, but no one brings that up. And it's just like, well, hold on. And I'm just supposed to ignore that just because of that's where we're taking this movie. And I'm like, okay, I guess I can accept it. It just doesn't feel as smart. But when we get to the styles and whatnot, I'm like, oh yeah, okay, I enjoy this. And Mia Goth's great. And DeBecky, I love her. Like, and I can watch her do whatever. And Kevin Bacon, once again, he's on a run, is amazing in this movie. Anytime he's on screen and the two of them on screen, I am enthralled. Once he is taken off, and we have to deal with the actual villain, so like this movie gets wacky. And while I knew that's where we were going, it's kind of just like I don't like this payoff. And for me to go through three films and this is sort of the payoff that we get, it just the actual ending, the coda is fine. The last act of this movie is so off of everything else that this movie was doing that I don't know how we got here. And so I like it. It's the weakest of the three for me, but I still say people should see it just to be a completist if you want. But I don't put this in as high regard as I do both Pearl and X.
Yeah, there is so much that I like in this movie, and I think you and I have the same sentiment of that third act really just kind of falls to the wayside. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, it's easy to get ahead of, which usually doesn't bother me as long as the movie itself is still decent.
Right.
But it was very, very odd to kind of see this movie in almost through two lenses. The first one is just sort of like MaXXXine on its own. Does this movie satisfy me from a serial killer in the 80s? Yeah, in the 80s, Satanic Panic,
Mhm.
LA, Star. And that answer is almost.
Yeah.
And I think ironically for the same reasons, because when I sort of look at it that way, I get really into the tone. The vibe is so cool and it's shot so well, and like so many fun like needle drop moments. That opening with her audition and then she walks out in front of the other girls and does that like, y'all might as well
Yeah.
go home because I just nailed that. Like that
Yeah.
shit was so fun. And like using the Night Stalker, but then also having this like random guy in the alley who may or may not be somebody, and then this whole like, well, we don't know if this is the Night Stalker or if this person who's branding these people is just using that. We don't really know where we're going with either of these ideas. um and then none of that really coalesced in a way.
Yeah.
So then when you look at it from like the conclusion to X and Pearl, which, you know, X is so much about like the sexual violence and the porn industry, and we're starting small, and Pearl goes back to the so many ideas of like fame and desire and want and also sex, and then we
Mhm.
kind of get here and we overlay a lot of that with satanic panic, and oh look, there's these protesters for this Puritan movie, and oh, we're also like talking about how nobody gets their start in porn, but they get their start in horror, and you still show your tits in horror and in porn. So like, what's the difference?
Mhm.
Um, to sort of take all of those interesting questions and then at the end just be like, boom, here's who the killer is. He's insane. And it's all about divine intervention and fame and zero consequences.
Yeah.
Bye. Is a little
Yeah.
like, well, we didn't really do anything with some of the interesting ideas you posited, and she really gets what she wants with almost no problems in her
No.
way,
Yeah.
and
No.
doesn't really seem angry at anything other
Right.
than the one scene with her video store friend, which we're pretty done with pretty quickly.
Yeah,
And
like I
then,
feel like the start of this movie tries to posit the idea of being the a survivor. And like that's like survivor's remorse. You out of all your friends, you are the only person that sort of lived. And that gets posited, but then dropped. And because like to your point, everything is so easy to her. Like she doesn't have like from the police to any nothing really is that big of a obstacle for her. She had more obstacles in X than she did in this film. And that's just it's a little too clean for the big ending that we get. You're like, oh well, yeah, she got everything she wanted. And so when you and I and most people probably get ahead of it, you're like, well, then why did I sit here for an hour and 50 plus minutes?
it also sort of makes it feel, as much as I liked Pearl, I don't know that you needed it for this movie. Like there was, I didn't feel like we really,
No.
outside of the thematic connections
Yeah.
and this kind of effort to be like, no, but like Pearl and MaXXXine are so like analogous and similar. They just have different outcomes.
Yeah.
Didn't really coalesce in a meaningful way. I also really, for all of the cool directing stuff that's in the movie, the
And
literal director of the movie talking at everybody got a little too on the nose, a little too like, well, I need to have a voice with my sequel. Can you believe that we're at the Psycho house? Can you believe they
it's
made a sequel to it? The
it's
world wasn't
very
ready for Psycho, but we did. I was like, we got it, guys.
very, very Lady in the Water, where it's like, hey, I'm gonna be self-aggrandizing, talk to you guys through this character that I can put on here. Yeah, I like Elizabeth, and I maybe because I'm in the business, like we're in the business, so I sort of get it. But it happens. There's like three of those things. One of those don't need to be there. And
Yeah.
so that's where it's kind of like, oh, we keep doing this. Why does this keep happening in this film?
And it's also that weird thing where like she has a lot of interesting things to say, but outside of her being like they're protesting the work, it should mean something. We never
Hmm.
really do enough with Puritan 2 as a movie to find out
Right.
if it did mean anything.
Yeah.
There wasn't really any like, I don't know, see, look at all the benefits of the work. Look at all
Yeah.
like, we never really took that step to be like either the protesters are wrong or the filmmakers are wrong. And in the middle of
As
it, you have somebody who's like just wants to be famous. And the last thing she says in the franchise is, I never want it to end. So, like, she's insane in her own way. And
right.
her dad, who's taken this televangelical stuff to the nth degree, who's insane in his own way. So it almost just sort of feels like no one really won.
Yeah.
And
Like they're on the same side of the psycho spectrum, just on different sides of that coin.
Yeah.
And yeah, and
And
right,
using
it
the
does
same
feel
tool of like television and TV to do it.
right, and it does feel very hollow when it ends. I'm kind of like, wait, that's this is the first one out of all of these where I felt like that's it. Even with the Mia Goth stare and Pearl, that was a cool sequence to end on, and I was like, oh, that works. This one I was like, this doesn't do the same thing that I think you thought that Pearl was doing with that freeze frame ending. Um, yeah, I didn't watch Pearl before going back in there. I watched X before going back in there because I kind of had a feeling that Pearl wouldn't sort of connect as much, other than the old keepers that are on the place. And so we get a couple of flashbacks of that. But yeah, you would think that if this is a trilogy, you're either trying to tell a connective tissue story, or you're trying to like, hey, there's a Pearl wanted one thing through fame, which we had her wanted to go to that singing contest and whatnot, versus MaXXXine. You would think you would parallel that a little bit more, and we don't. And sort of just drop that, other than like those groundskeepers. So X is pretty much the one-to-one direct sequel to this. It's kind of like, Pearl is there if you want so. Even though I think Pearl is stylistically the most different than two of
Yeah.
these.
And I think what I
um
do appreciate about all three movies is they are all very different tonally.
mhm.
Like he does really understand where he is and what time period he's in with each of these, and it harkens into that really well. It's just sort of a bummer because, like,
Yeah.
usually at the end of a trilogy, you're either like, we're gonna go stop the bad guy, or we're gonna do this. And I think the only other big horror, almost anthology trilogy I can sort of think of is like Fear Street on Netflix,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
that was so specifically like, we're gonna tell this story, and this story,
But they
and
have
it
that
all kind of,
connective tissue. Yeah.
yeah, and there is sort of a narrative driver, and this is it's analogous to that, but it's way more like we're dealing with the same theme. And
Yeah.
I think that's why that ending, to me at least, it felt very Dark Knight Rises, where we get to the end and we're like, forget everything we were talking about. We just got to go do this thing.
Yeah.
Forget all the stuff about the symbol. He's just got to go fly and blow up the bomb. Forget all
Yeah.
the stuff about sex and fame and power, where you just got to go stop the bad guy and she gets her movie. Um,
Yeah. Again, I think for me, I was sitting there like, there's so many threads you start pulling at. I'm just like, well, this doesn't make sense. Like, if we're saying that this is a fully lived in world, and this is what these police are terrible. The fact that she was able to blow do what she did to her dad on the Hollywood Hills with a helicopter saying, "Hey, stop," and then still go do her movie is odd to me. Like, that doesn't make sense. Like, I know, yeah, the whole world and everything's like he was a killer. You see all the bodies, but she still just murdered someone, and we're kind of like, cool, go do your thing.
Yeah. And right. And we do so much of like whatever you got to do. So we're going to do this cool murder for him, and she's going to do this stuff with her dad. And we talk about infamy so much that I kind of kept waiting for it to be like, oh, she is going to die
That's what I
and
thought was
then
going to happen.
be famous forever.
Correct.
This
Correct.
whole series is really going to be like fame, nobody remembers you, porn, nobody remembers you, but now
And right.
the world remember, like, you'll get your,
She uncovered this whole huge mystery. She died doing it because I would have thought if the police are telling you, hey, stop, put the gun down, and then you still go ahead and shoot, they're either going to shoot you down. Now, maybe she's a blonde girl, so perhaps not. You would still think you would be under arrest, or something would occur to you. But I thought, I was sitting there like, oh, they're going to kill her. Like, she's going to, after she kills them, they're going to kill her, and she's going to live on in infamy, because that's sort of what they've been selling. You want to be famous. The way you become famous is to this
yeah.
has to
And she
happen.
was nothing without the Black
But
Dahlia. Like, there's a lot of those little small
right,
lines in there.
yeah. And so for us
Um,
to kind of just end with her getting what she always wanted, I was like, well, then I'm sure
and it
that's
is
a
like
choice.
it is interesting because we see like the fake ending, and then we come
Mhm.
back and it does end on the shot of her head. So
Yeah.
a small part of me was like, oh, maybe she is dead. Like, are we trying to be like, oh, but like, see, like, or is that really just a harken back to the, it's going to be my head on this VHS tape?
Right.
And
Yeah.
because even that was like, oh, the Puritan head. Oh, my scream's been immortalized on the cover. And then we see her decapitated head. And even that, I
Mhm.
was like, okay, guys, we got like, we get it. But
Yeah.
it overall wasn't a bad movie. It was just kind of
No,
an unsatisfying movie, is really where I
that's the way
felt.
to say it. Yeah.
And
And
it's interesting to look at that.
in comparison to the two before, yeah, yeah, like those are much better rewatches than I think this one will be. It'll be interesting to see where I stand with this with the rewatch. although like I said, you and I both said there's some fantastic shots, and I do love that this movie does a really good job of showing Max's hustle. Like she is like, I need to work, I need to do this, I need to do this. And that opening sequence that Ty West shoots after the audition, when showing her going to work and going through the back, having go from straight from her audition to go to her porn set. I was like, that is chefs, that is a flawless shot. Like you nailed that. And so that's the sort of tear that I have. There's so many things in here. I giggled, her doing her lines of coke on her newly gained SAG card. There's just so many things that work here stylistically that I'm just like, if you could have just nailed the last 15 minutes, I would have probably felt the same way as I did about the previous two films as I did about this. Just that last act is a bit, it's a bit much.
Yeah, it just sort of loses its own message and story in its, I don't know, attempt to get really big, I
And tone
think.
of the
Like
film. Like, yeah, it feels like we were doing this super slow, methodical, almost 80s crime story, and then we become basically the
a
last act of
cult.
a last act of a screen movie. And it's what these don't mesh. Yeah.
Yeah, and it really was just that weird, like, okay, he's doing this, but he's imitating the Night Stalker, but he has this whole team, and then we're gonna do an exorcism and like get Hollywood out of her. It almost would have been better to flip the point of view on this and have it been like her dad and the evils of this, and it literally being like, I have to do this exorcism.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's also very interesting to go from like from serial killer slasher mystery noir to like, and it's an exorcist movie now, and we're filming the exorcist movie.
Right.
We're
Yeah.
gonna do it. um but yeah, so many cool moments and good performances and fun tone, and there's a lot to enjoy.
There
It
is.
just kind of, it just doesn't really amount to a lot at the very end, which is a bummer when it's the end of a big trilogy too, where you're just sort of like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
okay, so we were just kind of, this whole thing was building to the exorcism of Hollywood out of little girls. That's what we were.
Yeah.
Hollywood seduces you and makes you
Right.
sin, and now we have to remove it.
Yeah.
That's what we're landing on. And then instead of actually doing that, if you kill, you need
Kill the
divine intervention to become famous.
yeah.
So like you need your own narrative for people to never stop talking about you. Okay.
All right.
Yes.
Sure. Yeah. It's I think the uncomfortable silence that they have to give the previous Puritan girl is sort of how I felt about the movie as I was leaving there. They gave that moment of silence for her, and they all kind of like, well, when do we start? Can we start talking? That's how I felt in the movie. I was like, well, I guess that's yeah, I guess this
And
is
that
it.
was also, I felt bad because I was like, I get why that moment's funny, but I've also been in those moments where then someone has to be like, okay, cool.
Who's gonna be the first to break the silence?
Who wants to do it? Yeah, and I
Yeah.
think it was supposed to be played like nobody cares. And I was like, that's not really how this plays. It plays
No.
like how businesses actually operate, where,
Mm-hmm. We just gotta
yeah,
keep
moment of silence, someone then has
we
to
gotta
kind of be
keep
like,
going.
cool. Like,
Right. We
um,
are still on the clock.
yeah. And then another very on the nose director moment of just like, now no one will stop talking about you. What are you going to do? And I don't know. It really is kind of just one of those things where I'm like, cool, I don't really need to go back to this world. Um,
I
she
mean, it
did
made
it.
money. That's the
Yeah.
thing. Like out of all the Ty West flicks, it has made the most. It's made its budget back pretty much like already. And there have been inklings of Ty and Mia saying that they would go back to this world again, probably down the line. Don't know if I want that. Although it would be kind of cool if like maybe we get upgrade and go to like the 2000s or 90s or something like that, when she's like in her 40s, just to sort of see that era, 50s. But yeah, or do a different, maybe not have Mia Max is the lead, but do a different world side of that world. Sure, go play in it. Because I think obviously we've gushed on enough about Ty West directing in this that's not the issue. It's just
Yeah.
the script here toward the back end got a little wonky.
Yeah. Well, that is going to be it for us, folks. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. And you can follow us on YouTube at Hollywood Already Did It for Terrence's TV show reviews and trailer reactions, and on Twitter at Hollywood80i. I'm at As Always Blake, and he's at Terrence Tatum. And we will see everybody next time.
Later.